Before we jump into today's episode, I wanted to let you know that starting on July 10th and continuing throughout the summer, I am going to be hosting a series of pod chats in my Facebook group. I'm going to be talking to podcast hosts about their podcast journey, why they started, why they continue, the troubles and tribulations along the way, the brilliant ahas that they've had, guests, all of the good stuff. We're going to be talking about it all in my Facebook group, Start a Podcast UK. Come over and join the group at facebook.com/groups/Start a Podcast UK. Come and join the conversation. I hope to see you there. You're listening to the Mindset and Action Podcast, the place to be to grow and streamline your business. I'm your host, Donna Eade. Let's jump into the show. The lifeblood of any profitable company is a consistent flow of exclusive quality leads. James Dooley. Welcome back to the podcast, everybody, for this episode where we're going to be talking about how you generate high quality leads through your podcast. So this is an important one because at the end of the day, when we are in business, we don't want to be dealing with people that aren't really interested in what we're doing. We want to spend our time with those that really need our help and want our help. So we want to cultivate a situation where we are drawing high quality leads to us so that they can get to know us, they can get to like us, they can get to trust us, and that they can get to understand how we work so that they know if we're the right fit for them. And by doing that, we are going to have higher quality leads in our business as a general rule. So what can we do to actually bring in these high quality people? That is what we are going to be talking about today. We're going to be covering the power of podcasting for lead generation. We're going to look at creating content that attracts high quality leads, leveraging guest appearances and networking. So if you don't have your own podcast yet, that is your section. Optimizing your podcast distribution for lead generation. And we are going to look at actionable steps that you can take. So let's jump into it. So firstly, why is podcasting such a great option for lead generation? Well, it's because there's a lot of people that listen to podcasts. So there is 500 million podcast listeners across the globe. And whether you are a local business or a global business, your audience somewhere in there is going to be podcast listeners. So it is a great opportunity and it's growing, obviously. So there is going to be more and more people listening to podcasts. It is a great platform to help you build your authority and that know, like, and trust factor, like I mentioned. So with podcasting, you have that intimate connection with the people that are listening. And that means that they are getting to know you better and they're going to be able to work out for themselves whether you are the right person or not to work for. So this is more about attraction marketing rather than going out there and DMing people. Because if your podcast resonates with them, if you are resonating with them, that draws them in, gets them into your world, and then you get to nurture them. And so unlike other systems where you are having to kind of go out and find those leads, with a podcast, they're coming to you and they're self-selecting. So you could have like 100 people listening to your podcast and they'll listen to an episode and then they may decide that you're not for them. So they won't ever listen again. So maybe we've got 100 people and 10 of them decide after the first episode they're not interested in you as a person. And, you know, not everybody's going to be interested in you guys. It's a sad fact of life that we can't please everybody. I'm sure you all know that. But, you know, you get those 10 people drop off. Then the next episode, maybe another 10 people listen to your episode again and they're like, no, I don't think this is the right person for me. And it goes on and on and on until you are left with those core listeners. And of course, every week you're going to get new people that are coming in and they're going to start that self-selection process. But at some point, those people that are listening to you are going to go, do you know what, actually, what she's selling is just what I want. And she is just the person, or he is just the person who I want to give it to me, because they have looked at and been in your world for a while. looked at what you do and decided that you are the person that they need to work with. So the way we get high quality leads from podcasting is that we are continuously nurturing that audience over time, and they are self-selecting to whether they like you, and whether they like what you're talking about, whether they're there for the feeling that you're giving, the vibe that you're giving, and they will self-select, and you will get high quality leads if the high quality leads are people like you know, the people that you want to attract. So the high quality leads are leads that consist of people that know, like, and trust you and want to spend with you. Now, if you're talking about high quality leads in terms of people that are ready and willing to spend the money, then when you are on your podcast, you need to be talking about money. You know, you need to be talking about how much you charge for things. You need to be being transparent with your pricing, because that's going to allow those people to go, okay, that's the budget I'm looking at. And of course, if you're ever talking about a product that you're selling or a program that you're promoting, you can go into detail about where the value comes and why it is priced the way it is. So you're giving them that information, but then they get to self-select. So the people that are coming to you then are those high quality leads that are ready to spend money with you. And of course, to start that process of bringing in that type of audience, you need to understand who that audience is. So you need to have done a detailed analysis of who is your ideal client. And this isn't that they're 23, that they have 2 kids. This is talking about what it is that they need from you as a business owner. So for example, if you're a photographer, a brand photographer, for example, what is it that your clients need from you? What are their pain points? What are they sticking on? What is it that they really need photography for? Why is it important for them? You've got to hit all of that stuff and understand all of that stuff to be able to create content on your podcast that is going to speak to that audience and allow them to understand that you're the person that can help solve those problems for them. So let's talk a little bit more about that content that you're creating. So it's important that when you are designing your podcast episodes, that you are choosing topics that are going to resonate with your target audience, but also align with your business goals. Because let's face it, almost guarantee that the people that listen to my podcast are people that would like certain shows that I watch, and I could do a whole podcast episode on a show that I like to watch, and that could resonate with my audience, but that doesn't help my business. So it's got to be focused, and you've got to kind of niche it down to your business goals. You know, what are you trying to achieve with your podcast? What are you trying to achieve with your business? And how can you create topics for podcast episodes that are going to help you to resonate with your audience and explain to them what they need to know? So an example of this is this episode right here. This is a great example. So for those of you who are new to the podcast, you know, hi, I'm Donna, I'm your host, and I am a podcast host and mentor. And what I do is I teach people how to grow their businesses with podcasting, how to help them get further away from social media, how to be able to generate more content if they want to stay on social media through their podcast, and how they can launch their podcast really well to really get an explosive start that is going to help propel them forward in their business. So I help business owners do that. And this podcast is my mode of talking to you on a weekly basis. I bring in guest experts that are going to help you with your business side, streamlining, grow and streamline your business. That's what I'm all about here. Part of that growing your business is, to me, having a podcast. It helps you grow your business. Streamlining your business helps you with your processes, help you to take this part of the funnel, when I always call the podcast like your top funnel item, get this bit of the funnel in place, and then follow on with the other parts of the funnel to really streamline your business. So this podcast itself, this episode particularly, is aligned with my business goals. So I am launching my 8-week program again in September. So if you're interested in joining me for that program, you're going to be starting to hear a lot more about it in the coming weeks. So that is what this podcast episode is about. This is talking about how you get high converting leads from podcasts, so that you might think, oh, actually, yes, I want to do a podcast. Who do I know who helps with that? Oh, Donna helps with that. So this is aligned with my business goals, but it is also going to resonate with you guys, because if you are on this podcast, then you are in business and you are looking of ways to grow and streamline your business, and podcasting is something that can help you do that. So this in itself, it's very meta, isn't it? This in itself is a great way to give you an example, show you an example of how you do this. And another thing that you can do with your podcast, which is something that I really am not great at doing myself, it's something that I could definitely get better at, is including and incorporating lead magnets into your podcast. So somebody who does this really, really well, and so she's got a team of people behind her, and so therefore has the ability to delegate this stuff, because, you know, as one person, we've only got so much time in the day, is Amy Porterfield. So bringing in lead magnets into your podcast and doing episodes that talk about a particular topic that is related to your business that you can give people a freebie for. So, for example, I have done an episode in the past where I have talked about how you can build your authority with podcasting. The lead magnet attached to that podcast episode is my 3-part audio series on how to build your authority with podcasting, where I dive deeper into the topics I discussed in that episode. So that is a perfect example of how to incorporate a lead magnet, but it doesn't have to be something as severe as a 3-part audio series. You could do something that's a checklist, a free guide, templates. So it just depends on what it is that you're doing. So if we're taking our example of a brand photographer, they might produce some Canva templates that their clients can use, or general people can use, to help to bring in some brand consistency within their social media. So they might do some templates and make them editable so people can change them to their own brand colors and use them to do their social media. So that might be a great little lead magnet that can bring people in, give them some ideas. They might use those templates. They might go, oh, actually, now I can see. I actually would like to create some that are more like me, and go off and create their own, but they're getting an insight into how you work and what it is that you can do for them. So incorporating your lead magnets is a really great way of bringing people further down that funnel and bringing them closer to you and getting to engage with you and learn from you in some way. And of course, this enables you to gain their email address, because you're not giving them this freebie for nothing. You're giving it as an exchange for their email address. And of course, you've got to comply with GDPR, make sure that they know what they're signing up for. But by doing that, you are then able to nurture and build that relationship with them further. And the next thing to talk about is calls to action, and having those in your podcast. It is really important to try and focus on one call to action per episode. I think it can be overwhelming because it's an audio platform and it's not always easy. You know, when you think about how people listen to podcasts, they're usually busy doing something. So this is something that they've kind of got to go out of their way to do. So if you want them to download your freebie, that involves them picking up their phone, opening it up, clicking on the link in your show notes, and going through the process. If they're in the middle of driving, they're not going to be doing that. If they're in the middle of mowing or running, they're not going to be doing that. They're going to wait until they've finished, and then they've got to remember to do it. So you've got to make it compelling enough that people are going to sit down and do it. And you can do it, because I've done it with Amy's. I've listened to hers in the car and thought, okay, yeah, remember that one because I want to download that when I get home, and I go and do it. But also you have got to remember that people aren't going to remember everything. So if you give them, oh, go and join my Facebook group and don't forget to download the freebie, and I've got a masterclass coming up at the end of the week, so make sure you sign up for that. That's too much. They're not going to remember it all. So I usually have a freebie as my intro to the podcast. I will have a little roll piece of information that tells you to go and download my freebie. So that's the first thing that people usually hear. Then at the end of my podcast, I might say, come and join my Facebook group. So I'm giving them two things there, but one of them's right at the beginning. So they might actually be sat there on their phone at the time because they've just started it. So they may not be into what they're doing. So they might be able to go and download that freebie straight away because it's in the show notes. So they're going to be able to click through. And at the end, again, they may just be finishing what they're doing. So they might go, oh yeah, I'll just go and do that. So it just depends. But if you've got more than two things that they've got to go and do, they're not going to remember it. And I would keep them quite separate. So have something right at the beginning before your podcast even starts, if you want to have that like continual thing. And to me, that's what that freebie is about, because it's like it's always there. So every episode they get reminded of that one thing to do. And then at the end of the episode, I'm asking them to do something specific for that podcast episode. But if you've got 3 or 4 different calls to action at the end of your podcast, you're going to confuse them. What does a confused mind do? It says no, and it doesn't bother doing anything. So try doing it that it's just one call to action, and maybe you have one call to action a month. So maybe you're promoting a certain freebie and you start the month with doing an episode that is around that freebie and linking it at the end. And then maybe the next 3 episodes you say, oh, and don't forget, I did that great episode on such and such. Go back and listen to it. Don't forget to download the freebie attached to it, which was, and then you can explain it. So you're sending them back to that original episode and they'll be able to download it from there. So that is just a really important thing with calls to action, because you don't want to give too many things for them to do. Like on a social media post, you're asking them to DM you, you're asking them to comment below, you're not asking them to do all the things because it's just too much for people to remember and process. So just one thing per episode that they need to go and do. So moving on to leveraging guest appearances, networking, cross promotion, collaboration. This is the part for those of you who are not yet in the realm of creating your own podcast. So let's start with talking about guest appearances. So guesting on podcasts basically gives you almost the same kind of access to those high quality leads as having your own podcast. However, you do not have the ability to build that know, like, and trust factor to the degree that you can with your own podcast, because obviously the audience is going to be different for every episode that you're guesting on, because they're going to be different podcasts. So it's harder to build that authority and that know, like, and trust factor with a new audience. But if you can get that compelling call to action and you have been able to sort of, they resonated with what you said, and at the end of the day, remember, we're looking for the high quality leads. So we want the people that really resonate from that group to take an action. So if you create a episode that really is going to resonate with that audience that you want to attract, then they are going to be more compelled to take the action, the call to action that you give at the end. So this could be a discount, this could be a freebie, this could be join my Facebook group, this could be send me a DM, follow me on social, whatever it is that you want to do. But again, I would limit it to one thing that you want them to do. Now, I often have guests on my show that will turn around and I will say to them, so where do you hang out online? And I want them to just say, I'm here, this is where you'll find me, because I want people to be able to go, okay, she said she was there. Whereas sometimes I get guests that come in and they go, oh, well, you can find me on LinkedIn, I'm this, and on Instagram, I'm this, and my website is this, and you can email me at this, and it's too much information. My listeners are going to have gone, don't know what you said, not even listening anymore. But if you turn around and say, do you know what? I love to hang out on LinkedIn, so come and find me, donna.eid, on LinkedIn, and connect with me there. It'd be great to see you in my DMs or whatever. If you say that, then people know, okay, so she's a LinkedIn person. How do I feel about that? You know, you're looking at attracting the people that you want to work with. So if you are somebody who likes to hang out on LinkedIn and likes the vibe over on LinkedIn, then people that like to hang out on LinkedIn are probably going to be more your people than people that hang out all the time on Facebook. So, you know, if they're happy to hang out on LinkedIn, they're going to come and follow you. If they don't, then they're probably not your client, you know? So it is making these decisions that you've got to hang out, they say, where your audience is. And I would say that where you are most comfortable is where you're going to attract your audience from. Now, there is something to be said that if you're a photographer, then obviously Instagram is going to be a much better place for you to be sharing your stuff than LinkedIn, because people who are looking for pretty pictures to look at are going to be on Instagram because it's that type of platform, but they're also going to be on Pinterest. So it's a case of kind of knowing what you're comfortable with and knowing what your audience is looking for. So are they looking for somebody who can provide them a professional service? If so, wouldn't LinkedIn be a better place to go for somebody offering a professional service? And when I'm talking about professional service, I don't mean that they are professional in what they do, because everybody in business is being professional in what they do in their realm, but looking for something that is more, podcasting or VAs or business strategists, those kind of corporate-y type roles rather than the creative roles. So that's probably a better way to look at it, sort of the more sort of business side of things versus the more creative side of things. More business side of things, LinkedIn's going to be a great place for people to go and search for that. More creative type of things, people are going to gravitate to Instagram for that. So people who are looking for things are going to look for different things in different places. So even if they enjoy spending time on one platform over the other, if they're looking for a certain type of person, they're more likely to gravitate towards a platform they think that person will be on, if they're going to look for that person preemptively rather than just scrolling and finding. And at the end of the day, you want people that are actually actively looking for you, not people that are trying, I hate that idea of us having to try and stop the scroll with what we're doing, because those people weren't looking for you. So even if you stop the scroll with something amazing, they're going to go, oh, that was interesting, and scroll on if they're not your client. So what difference does it make? So that's just something to think about. So with your guest episodes, make sure you're doing that one call to action at the end. Make sure you're giving fantastic value. And what I would say is make the most of that guest appearance. And I have said this before, I will say again, I will keep saying it until I am blue in the face. From one podcast episode, you can probably create 30 days worth of content. And as a guest, if you do that and you schedule it to go out, get the podcast episode, once it's gone live, share it on that day, and then make a point of creating as much content as you can, whether that's sound bites or graphics, quotes, things like that you can share on social media. And you distribute those posts that you create over the course of the next 2 months, 3 months. You can just drop them out every now and then you are going to be reinforcing that episode to your audience, which is going to help you build your authority with your audience, and they're going to get the know, like, and trust. So whereas somebody who has their own podcast is preaching to their audience, talking to their audience, sharing on social to their audience, and building that know, like, and trust. To build the know, like, and trust factor, you need to be sharing it with your audience, because that's the people that are going to keep coming back again and again and going to be going, oh, I've heard her say that before, or, oh, that's really resonated with me this time, or, oh my gosh, yeah, why didn't I remember that she did that? So you're going to be constantly reminding them of who you are, what you do, and why you do it. So that is why it's really important to share it with your audience and take advantage of it. Use it as a piece of content that you are going to disseminate, break apart, and share with your audience. And don't forget to tag the host every time you share it. And by doing that, you are going to be going into the next realm, which is cross-promoting and collaboration. So when you're promoting these episodes, the podcast host is going to reshare it. You're sharing their podcast. They're not going to not reshare it if they see that you've shared it. So if you tag them, they'll reshare it, which, guess what, gives you another hit at their audience. And oh my gosh, if people tagged me in stuff after we'd done an episode and was like, oh, it was such a great time to go on Donna's podcast, I would so share it. I would be so excited to share it. And what that does is that starts building your relationship with the host, extending that relationship beyond that one episode. You can start having conversations, building partnerships, building that high quality referral opportunity. So there is so much that can be said for guest appearancing, building that relationship with the host, offering that cross promotion, creating those opportunities to share the content, and just really putting your all into it and having a system and process in place for how you deal with guest posts. Because if you just go on the podcast, and I said this before to friends of mine, I feel like a lot of times guests come on to hijack my audience. And it sounds extreme, but if they don't share it themselves off their own backs, then that's what it kind of feels like to me. It's like, well, you've come in as if you're doing me a favor, when actually my inbox is full of people asking to come and guest on my podcast. And I actually prefer to go out and ask people that I've kind of got a connection to, or I know through some sort of network, because I want to be able to help people that I'm connected with to promote and share their businesses and their skills. And they come on as if they're doing me a favor, and then they don't use it and they don't share it. So I get nothing out of it for me, because yes, I've got a podcast episode, but hey, guys, here I am talking. You know me, I could talk the legs off a donkey. So I don't need to have guests on my show to be able to provide you with value. So it's an added bonus. I like to bring in guests for you because I'm not the best at everything. Certainly not in business terms is something that, I struggle with. So whatever I'm kind of struggling with, I go out there, I find an expert on it to bring them into you. But if they're not going to share it with their audience, then I don't get that hit at the cherry that they're getting from my audience. Do you know what I mean? So it's really important that when you guest on a podcast episode, that you treat it as if it's your own podcast and share it and promote it and share it again, because it's going to stand you in good stead, especially with that host. And you have then opened the doors to being invited back for another episode, because it's really tough out there to get your podcast to an extended audience without paid ads, without a lot of people kind of working with you in doing that. So that's why when I talk about launching a podcast, I talk about launching it well and having a hype squad around you, because you've got to get it out there to as many people as you can. And, at the end of the day, our audiences grow fairly slowly over time on social media. So yes, there's going to be new people coming in, but how else are you promoting your podcast to people? By guesting on other people's podcasts and talking about it, for sure. But when you have guests on, that is kind of another avenue to promote your podcast to another audience. And if they don't actually share it, then it's kind of, what's the point in having guests on your show? And you will find that there are podcast hosts that won't have guests on their show because it's too much effort. And it is a lot of effort. It is much harder for me to edit for two voices than it is to edit for one. And I'm very used to speaking on a podcast, so I'd make less mistakes, and I also have a system in place for dealing with mistakes that I do make, whereas somebody coming in may not be as experienced with podcasts, may make more mistakes, may unfortunately be somebody who ahs, and kind of, does that all the time through their talking, which I edit a lot of that out. Why? Because if that was happening every sentence, and when people are nervous, they do those things more. So whereas when they're talking to you one-on-one, you might hear an every now and then. Well, it almost I would say 10x's when they're being recorded in a recording situation, whether that's for video or for audio. And I have to edit some of that out because it drives me bonkers listening to it. I wouldn't like to think what it does to you guys when you're listening back to it. Now, there are people that are, podcasters themselves, so they've kind of got the ahs out of their system by the time they come and are a guest on my show. But there are some people that are not used to that. And if they are somebody who goes out of their way to promote the show again and again, then maybe comments on another episode or shares another episode with their audience and says, "Do you know what, I just listened to this other episode, I was on the show and is trying to be part of my world in that way, even if they are a bit of a pain to edit, I would still be likely to invite them back on the show because they're doing such a great job of promoting the podcast, and then it makes it worth it. So that is just something to bear in mind when it comes to guesting and building those relationships with the host and the opportunities for getting those high quality referrals from the host, from their audience, and, also from your own audience by sharing the podcasts that you do with your audience. Okay, moving into optimizing your podcast for distribution. Now, we have kind of covered that a little bit in the guest side of things. So the same thing happens for podcast hosts. If you don't share your episode, nobody's going to listen to it. So you want to make sure that you are distributed across all the major podcast platforms. You can do that in your host usually. So for those of you who don't know or are like, hang on a minute, what did you just say? Podcasting is done in a way that you have a host platform, which is where you upload your podcast. And then through that platform, you can distribute it to all of the podcast directories. And the podcast directories are things like Apple, Spotify, Deezer, Acaster, Podchaser, Good Pods. These are all directories that podcasts are disseminated to, and it's done through an RSS feed. So if you are a blogger or old school blogger, you will understand what that means. But it's basically these platforms, Apple, Spotify, Good Pods, all of those are going back to your host and reading your RSS feed on a regular basis to pick up the new episodes that you are putting out there. So that's how it works. So it's not a case of, how do I get my podcast on Apple? You have to put your podcast onto a hosting platform, and then you get the hosting platform to share it with Apple. So there is a couple of steps involved. I go over it in my 8-week program. It can be a little bit complicated in some areas, but it is, it's a step-by-step process and we can get you through it. But it is important that you are getting on as many of those platforms as you possibly can. Now, Google Podcasts is no longer, it is done through YouTube, and that's slightly different again because it doesn't feed back to your host. So whereas Apple and Spotify send back information, all the others send back information about who's, how many downloads you're getting and things like that, YouTube is kind of a one-way system. So it will go out and it will grab what's on your RSS feed and it will load it into YouTube, but it doesn't send information back. And also it doesn't update information. So if you've ever had a YouTube channel or ever looked at a YouTube channel, you know that you've got the video at the top and then underneath you've got a description, and you will often hear YouTubers say, the link's in the description below. So that information is pulled from your host. So your show notes are pulled from your host and put onto YouTube, but that stuff can't be updated through being pulled because of the way it's done. So with the other platforms, it's almost like they're carbon copying it from your RSS feed. So when they update, they just run a full carbon copy update. So anything that's changed will get picked up. Whereas YouTube, it's just pulling the latest new thing and it's keeping it as it is because of the way YouTube is set up. It's not taking a carbon copy. It's saying, there's the audio file, extract that. There's the words, extract that, and put it into YouTube's platform. So your YouTube listens don't show up in your host's downloads. So you've got to kind of combine those two numbers. So that's a little bit complicated, but it is really important that you share it in as many places as possible. So you want to make sure that you are sharing your RSS feed to YouTube so you can have it on YouTube, because that is a search engine as well. So that's really important. And then you want to make sure that you're looking at optimizing your titles and your descriptions for that search keyword searchability. And that is where SEO comes in. And we spoke to Jules last week about SEO. So definitely go back and listen to that one. And if you are specifically looking for podcast SEO help, she does that. I believe she has a little course on her website about podcasting SEO. So you can go over and check that out. I'll have a conversation with her about it if you can't see it on her website. But I am going to be having her on the Mike Action podcast, which is my second podcast, to talk about podcast SEO, because it is really important when you are doing video or audio that you are also doing something with words that is going to help you get found in search. So optimizing those titles and descriptions for those keywords and being searchable. Then you want to make sure that you are doing that social media side of things. So whether you are somebody who wants to move away from social media completely with your podcast, or whether you're somebody who wants to leverage your podcast for your social media, you can do both. I would say that if you're going to try and step away from social media, that you potentially need to be looking at paid social media ads to keep you in front of the right people without you having to be on social media yourself. That is something that I'm going to be looking at further down the road. So, if you want, I'll be the guinea pig and I'll feed back to you how it goes. But it is really great to be able to share your podcast on your social media. And I always say that if you have a podcast, there is never a time where you don't have something you can say online, because you can always share an episode. And we're on episode, 260 this episode? How crazy is that? So I have 260 episodes that I could share, which means that for the next 260 days, I could literally do nothing on my social media except share a podcast episode that I've done every day for the next 260 days. And I wouldn't have to think about what am I going to post today? It's just like, what's the next podcast that I did? And I could go back and share my back catalogue. And you can do that. I wouldn't necessarily say that's the best way to do it, because obviously for me, my podcast has changed over the years. If you're an OG listener, you'll know that it was the Mindset and Action podcast when we started. No, it was the Society of Professional Wedding Vendors podcast when we started, changed over to the Wedding Procast UK, and is now Mindset and Action. So it has had different iterations, which means that the podcast episodes back in the beginning, not so relevant to the people who are listening to my podcast now, although I do have some OG listeners. Love you guys. That still listen, because what I do now is still relevant to who they are. So it is important to share it on social if you are using social, and obviously email marketing. Don't forget, in your email, if you have a weekly email that already goes out, you don't have to do another one for your podcast. Just make a section at the bottom of the email that says, and this week on the podcast, I'm talking about this. Here's the link, or you could bring it into the main body of the email. If you want to talk about, if you're in a promotion period or something and you've got something really cool that you said on the podcast, you could do it in your weekly email. Talk about, oh my gosh, I just did this great episode, blah, blah, blah. Here's the link to it. So there are ways that you can use it in your email slightly differently depending on what season you're in, what type of episode it was, but it's really good to do that. And one of the best things you can do is try and get people to share it from social. So if you share it on social, ask people to share it for you as well. Ask your listeners to share it. I'm going to say that to you guys right now while I'm here. If you're enjoying this episode, if you think that somebody else could benefit from what I've been saying, then please do go and share it with them, because this episode is one of my longest episodes and I've been trying to keep them to 30 minutes recently. So this is going longer. I hope it is of value to you. And if it is, I would love it if you would share it on your social media. Tag me in it and I'll reshare it so that you get put on my stories as well, because that helps everybody grow. And and I would love to see your biggest takeaway from this episode. So making sure that you're doing all of those things, but then the biggest and most important thing is to be tracking and measuring what that's doing for you. Because if you are sending out an email and nobody is clicking the links, then you know that I'm not saying the right thing. I'm not getting that hook to get those people to come over and listen to the podcast from my email. So what can I do to change that? If you aren't getting anybody sharing it on social, then what is not compelling enough for them to share it? What can you change? So it's all the stuff that you can learn and grow from. And that works too as a guest, as we were saying earlier, sharing it, what's working for you, what's not, change it. Change the call to action, change the wording, change the graphics, play with it and see what you can do to make it work for you. So that is it. I hope that you have seen how podcasting can really enhance your business and how it can bring in those high quality leads, and how if you're promoting it correctly, and by correctly, I don't mean there's a right and a wrong way to do it, but actually promoting it, I suppose. If you're actually out there promoting it, if you are making sure that the episodes are tailored to the people that you want to work with and tailored to your business goals, if you're making sure that your guests are fully prepared and equipped with the information that they need so that they can share it too. And if you are a guest on a show, that you are making sure that you are doing that social side of things and publicizing it, building those relationships with these people. I think building relationships with your guests / hosts is a really great way of strengthening your business network to a point where you've got somebody that does everything. You need somebody who does SEO. Jules is your girl, go and speak to her. You need somebody to talk to about money, Sarah Brill or Katrina, go and talk to them. If you need somebody to help with your health and well-being, go and talk to Catherine and Julie over at the Far Too Fabulous podcast. I've got all these connections to all of these people that have guested on my podcast, and there are so many more that I couldn't even pull out of my head right there because I was on the spot. But that's the power of podcasting, and it has brought me some fantastic leads through, and it can do the same for you. So what I want to say to you is, if you are pumped about podcasting and you think, yes, this is something that I want to do, I want you to come and join me in my Facebook group. So I am doing a brand new masterclass at the end of September. I haven't got the page ready for registrations yet, but it will be ready very soon. So I want you to come over and join my Facebook group, because I will be telling everybody in there, so you will be able to see it. And I will do it as an event, which I will invite everybody to. So you will definitely get a notification of it. So come over to Start a Podcast UK is the group. It is linked in the show notes. It's always linked in the show notes. So you can go down and just open up the show notes and click that link. Come over and join me in there, and what you will get is the advantage of the pod chats that I'm doing. So this week I spoke to Debbie Gilbert. She was on yesterday. I'm sure it was a fantastic conversation. I'm recording this before then, so I don't know for sure, but I know Debbie and I know it'll be gold. So you can go back and catch that replay. You can go and listen to some other replays of me talking to podcast hosts about their journey with podcasting, why they started, why they continue, what benefit they get out of it, what they love, what they hate. All of the information I am getting from them. So you can come over and catch up with all of those and catch the live ones on Wednesdays going forward throughout September. So I think my last one is like the third week of September that I've got booked in. So you can come and join me for those, and also join me for that masterclass at the end of the month. Okay, so that is it for me today, guys. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. I know it was a long one this week, but I thought it was really important to make sure that I gave you as much information as I could about how you can use podcasting to get high quality leads for your business. Right, that's it from me. I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now. Don't forget to hit those stars and leave a review of the podcast where you listen if you found value in what you heard today. It's a free way you can help the podcast reach more people just like you.